Okay, so I think that we can start. So good morning, everyone. I'm Erika, and I'm a master's degree student of human rights at the University of Padova and an Internet Wide Plus. I'm very honored today to moderate this webinar about the intersection of gender, migration routes, and human trafficking. This webinar forms part of a wider series of webinars organized by Wide Plus. And in this sense, before starting, I will pass the word to Gea, coordinator at Wide Plus, who will briefly explain what this series of webinars is about. Thank you, Gea.
Thank you so much, Erica. Welcome, everyone. I would like to really thank the panelists and also really Erica for organizing this and for presenting in a minute this around this important topic. This is part of a webinar series in which we address different topics in the context of what's really happening in Europe, that is very puzzling for us and very worrying. This content backlash in which anti-gender is intertwined with anti-LGBTQI plus backlash and anti-climate justice, pushing back on cuts for ODA, all these kinds of developments. We are very worried about this, and we have a several webinar series, one in this May and June, and one in the autumn. And still coming is a webinar on democracy on 18th of June, and there will be also a webinar this week on the EU trade negotiated deal with Mercosur countries, that are the countries in the Latin American area. And you can read also a report from this webinar. This will be published later onwards. So and from the other webinar. So I hope you will be encouraged to join one of the other webinars as well, or to kind of exchange with White Plus. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gea. Now, before starting, I wanted just to say that the webinar is divided into sections, panels, after which there will be a moment of discussion with the audience in case you want to give your contribution or have questions. This webinar is recorded, so if you don't feel comfortable with it, you can change your name and keep your camera off. So now I will give the word to our first panelist, Erika Oliva, who is an Italian anti-trafficking expert, and she will delve into the legislative framework to combat human trafficking at the European Union level. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you very much, Erika, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and discuss around such an important and urgent matter. I will try during my intervention to briefly provide an overview of what is the newest legislation in the European Union concerning THP, and later on we will see about different forms of THP. So concerning the EU legal framework, I think that almost everyone is aware that the cornerstone of EU's effort to combat human trafficking, also say THB. I mean, I will use the THB acronym a lot. So THB stands for Trafficking in Human Beings. Is Directive 36 of 2011. Which has established the minimum rules concerning the definition of criminal offenses and sanction in the area of human trafficking in Europe. At the same time, the directive, compared to previous global legislation, such as the Palermo Protocol, adopted a more holistic and human rights-based and victim-centered and also gender-specific approach, because it broadened the definition of THP, including also more gender-specific features than what was written in the Palermo Protocol. Indeed, the directive recognized, for example, that women and girls are disproportionately affected by trafficking, particularly for the purposes of sexual exploitations. The directive also gave mandate to the member states to ensure that all victims, no matter gender or sexual orientation or whatever, receive appropriate assistance and support with, of course, special attention to most vulnerable groups. The directive, as I mentioned before, the directive explicitly acknowledged the gender dimension of trafficking, requiring also states to adopt gender-specific measure to be implemented in their effort to prevent, protect, and prosecute offenders. These, for example, included trainings for officials in order to recognize also gender-specific indicators and gender-specific forms of THB, and also translate them into providing appropriate gender-sensitive support services. In June 2024, so last year, the European Union adopted a revised version of the directive. So now the official cornerstone of the EU legislation is Directive 1712 of 2024, which amended Directive 36 of 2011. The revision was prompted by the need to address, of course, new forms and evolving trends of exploitation and trafficking that were not explicitly covered in 2011 directive. So for those of you who maybe are not well aware of what trafficking is, when we talk about trafficking, we talk about form of modern slavery of people, meaning that traffickers can use a person multiple times. So it's one of the most profitable forms of crime in the recent era, because if you think about trafficking of goods, so for example, drugs. So you traffic the drugs once and you make a profit out of it, of course. Same for the firearms. But if you talk about person, you can exploit someone multiple times, gaining money over it once, twice, 3, 4 times. So it's really one of the most profitable and tremendous form of crimes that we do have nowadays. And when we talk about trafficking, we talk about, it's not just about movement, so meaning that we do not need to have the cross-border element in order to define the crime of trafficking, but we just need to have the form of, apologies for the noise in the office. So we just need to have the form of coercion. We just need to have one person like forcing someone else to do something that person did not want to do, just for the mere purpose of profiting of that. So it can be sexual exploitation, can be labor exploitation, petty crimes, but we will see later on all the rest of trafficking forms. Going back to the directive, the revision of directive that happened last year, as I was mentioning, was meant to address new form and evolving new forms of trafficking, including, for example, the online dimension. In particular, the revised directive expanded the definition of THP, including surrogacy for exploitative purposes. And on this, I want to be really clear, because the directive is not prohibiting surrogacy per se, but is prohibiting surrogacy for the purpose of trafficking in human beings. Meaning, if a woman is exploited, is trafficked for being a surrogated mother, then it's a crime covered within the scope of the directive. So this is because it's like a very controversial topic around member states, but the directive states really clear. It's just surrogacy for exploitative purposes. Same for forced marriage. The directive prohibits forced marriage for the purpose of trafficking human beings, meaning that if a girl is trafficked for being a forced bride, then the crime falls within the scope of the directive. And also the same for illegal adoption. So all these type of crimes have to be linked with the dimension of trafficking. Why they decided to do this kind of revision? Because of course, this form of abuse have been increasingly identified within the territories of member states, and also thanks to the contribution of civil society organizations, particularly the one who worked a lot in the context of mixed migration flows and digital technologies. What do we obtain with this revision of the directive? So of course, we obtain a broader definition of THB, the broader so far, because also like broadening this definition helped to ensure that all the member states in Europe, in the European Union, adopted a uniform approach. But also it helps to boost the prevention and awareness effort within member states, because of course the directive requires also member states to, for example, launch campaigns targeting specifically vulnerable groups, also with more gender focus and gender approach, also targeting, for example, children or minority groups or migrants. The directive also includes stronger obligation for data collection and reporting within national authority, because, for example, it requires member states to gather disaggregated statistics about THB. And this is a very important element because, for example, thanks to data, we are able to identify evolving trends and adopt consequently the prevention efforts, because prevention does a lot in the context of THB. Also because like talking data wide, if you look in all member states, more or less, the data about prosecution, for example, are always the lowest and more difficult to obtain for a series of reasons, including, for example, the fact that within the criminal offense of THB, people involved are also involved in other types of crimes that are generally more easy to be prosecuted. So then, of course, the directive asks also for enhancing support services for victims, including, for example, increase the access to legal assistance and protection to prevent people from falling victims of re-victimization, and also ask member states to provide tailored service for child victims, but also for LGBTQ+ victims. Also, as I mentioned before, keeping in mind the gender perspective of the crime per se. And of course, the directive asks to strengthen criminal provisions, ensuring that penalties for traffickers reflect the seriousness of the crime. And last but not least, it includes a special focus on digital facilitation, meaning that the directive introduces a new obligation addressing the role of digital technologies in recruitment, control, and exploitation as an aggravating circumstance. Then we have a point of debate, and I'm trying to shorten it up to also give floor to the other panelists. We have a point that has been like widely discussed among member states, which is the criminalization of knowingly using services provided by THB victims. So what does it mean? It means that the directive provides that you criminalize, so you prosecute whoever is using knowingly the services provided by victim of THB of any kind. But the point resides in demonstrating the knowingly use phase. Because, for example, this is what is called more the Nordic approach. So this approach is widely used in Northern European countries. But, for example, it is not used at all in Southern Europe countries. Or in countries where, for example, prostitution is legal. Because in this case, how do you demonstrate that the client is knowingly use the service of someone that can be trafficked? So, you know, that let's say that the line here is very tiny. And then, of course, and here I'm stopping with just in case there are questions or whatever. The other topic, as I mentioned, is technology facilitating THB. So this is the first time ever that technology is included into legal instruments. Because of course the directive will have to be implemented into member state legislation by next year, July next year. So of course, it urges member states to also take in consideration seriously the online dimension, because after COVID, of course, everyone has started talking about technology, the digital world, how it affected the service, but also like the recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the first time ever that has been written into paper that you actually have to think about including it into your national legislation, and that the use of technology and also, for example, social platform can be an aggravating circumstances in the case of THP. Thinking about, for example, minors, because a lot of minors nowadays are recruited through the use of online platform. To finish it up, of course, like everything looks so cool on paper, but of course, there are going to be a lot of challenges and areas of improvement. So for example, intersectionality, because if from one point of view, the directive addresses the gender perspective, it often lacks a comprehensive intersectional approach. Considering, for example, race, ethnicity, migration status, and other factors that can aggravate already vulnerable situation. And of course, there are implementation gaps because not all the member states starts from the same starting point. And this also reconnect to the fact that in some states, victim identification processes are more advanced than in other, especially for what concern marginalized group. And here I reconnect with the theme of today's meeting, which is mixed migration flows. So a lot of states still lack, for example, training and forms of promptly identify victim of THP among mixed migration flows. And here I stop to just because I think that I'm on time. I should be on time, but there is going to be a lot time for question later on. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erika, for providing such a clear analysis and interesting insights into the legislative framework. We will have later on a moment for discussion after this second panel. And now I will give the word to Zorana Parezanovic from the Serbian NGO Atina, who will expose the job done by her NGO and the situation of migrants along the Balkan route with a specific focus on Serbia. Thank you, Zorana. And in the meantime, if you have any questions and you want to write them in the chat, you can write them in the chat.
Thank you, Erika, so much. And thank you for the invitation for today's webinar. And thanks for White Plus for an amazing collaboration for many, many years now. And to all the efforts to bring up the topics that are such important as the one that we are discussing today as well. I'm gonna share my screen. I hope that all of you can say it. I would like to tell you a few words about Atina and Atina's work in the past years about provision of the support to the victims of human trafficking, including the ones from refugee and migrant population. As I already mentioned, and thoroughly beginning the things that came as an input from Erika and also the part of the invitation. You already know that we are working for more than 20 years now in the area of combating human trafficking and gender-based violence, and our main focus and the base of our work is related to the comprehensive and long-standing programs for those with experience of gender-based violence and human trafficking, because we truly believe if in the base of the programs is not the long term, that there is also a great possibility that the risks or exploitation may appear again. So our programs are long-term programs and are related to the tailor-made approach. Even though on the screens you can see that it's written that 2015 was the year when Atina was basically engaged with the support to the migrant migrants and refugees, especially women and the girls. That's partially true, but one of the first experience of direct support to those who experience sexual violence and exploitation came the years before, which gave Athena enough space and time to start preparing the mobile teams who will do the work on the field from 2015 as in response to those who were the most vulnerable. I remember the time when the different NGOs and also institutions and international organizations were preparing their response to the refugee crisis to 2015, not only in Serbia, but in the region. The focus was basically humanitarian and was focused on response to the basic needs. Athena's approach was a bit different. What we wanted to do with a group of experts and practitioners that we brought to the field was basically to discover and highlight the violence that was happening, because many, especially institutional response, was not tackling at all the issues of violence, saying and stating that there is a limited time for reaction, that we cannot do anything. Athena's focus was actually that, to step up on the field with experienced practitioners who will discover and learn about violence that the refugees and migrants, especially women and children, were suffering in the countries of origin on the way, but also in the Serbia, and also try to map the potential risks that can occur and that can happen in the future on their way and on their road, and do some steps that can be beneficial for their support. So from that period of time, for now, Athena had a contact with more than 10,000 refugee and migrant women and children who were coming from the vulnerable background and had a different experience of violence. The work to them and assistance to them was provided through the different programs that Athena offered, from assisting housing and self-shelter, which was basically the only one for women with the experience. When I say the only one, I mean the only appropriate, the place and the facility and accommodation where she will be seen and her needs will be understood, and the proper response will be given to them, because there was also some attempts during the crisis when women and girls with experience of violence were accommodated within the state shelters, but we found many difficulties that occurred in that period of time. So when I'm saying the only one, I was related to the appropriate one to their needs. Also field support teams that I already mentioned, even though Athena is based in Belgrade, but our mobile teams and our mobile units are operating around Serbia, and also visiting all the available asylum centers and transit centers. We also have our own reintegration center, or the open club, as we call it, the space where the refugees can come and be a part of our daily activities, as well our economic empowerment program, which we are basically using to support the whole integration process, and also proactively react and address the possible forms of future violence and or exploitation. There are several certain programs. Some of them I already mentioned, but it's some as some of the highlights is what we are the most proud of in this process. As I said at the early beginning, this importance and meaning on having something that is long-term, and that is actually focusing on social inclusion, social integration, and recovery, and that is directly responding to the needs of the person individually. So it's not some scheme or the pattern that is just used to be copied for the certain categories. That is also how we are addressing intersectionality, and how we make sure that, like, not all the women from refugee and migrant population need the same things. It depends from the background, from the experience, from also other things, plans for the future, or the way how they're dealing with the trauma that they experience in their life. If we add experience of being a part for LGBTIQ plus community, for example, it's another lens. So it means that the whole approach is very very directly focused on the individual needs and experience of each person. I already mentioned our economic empowerment program, and we were also lucky to have our own social enterprise that we opened 10 years ago, which also became a very strong part of our economic empowerment program, and also another space that gave us possibility to invite women and girls from refugee and migrant population to get some additional skills and knowledges and training courses for the preparation for the labor market within our amazing bagel shop. We also created partnerships with different enterprises, also with chains of hotels and chains of supermarkets. So through the partnerships and skill buildings with both of our beneficiaries, but also our partners, we are creating the better opportunities for their inclusion. Sometimes by saying inclusion, would also like to refer to the approaches and the lack of the inclusion programs here in Serbia, because still the state point is that those people are staying here temporarily. So we don't have to deal a lot with the inclusion programs and long-standing efforts for the new opportunities and chances for this group. Advocacy is also one of the very important parts of Athena's approach and Athena's works. On the next slides, I will show to present some recent, in the last several years, there have been some changes in the laws that impacted the whole management of migration here in Serbia, and that's definitely one of the Athena's areas of work. But what we also did, work was not done only by the Athena staff or experts by knowledge, but also with the collaboration with the experts by experience, who are our former beneficiaries who gather for creating the change in the system of support for victims of human trafficking and gender-based violence. So they're basically by hand in hand with us addressing and doing the advocacy efforts on the daily work, but also supporting their own community on the field daily through cultural mediation, workshop facilitation, etc., but also meeting the experts and decision maker and stakeholders and asking and addressing for concrete changes and the gaps that they faced through being a part of whether asylum procedure or being a victim of human trafficking or domestic violence here in Serbia, or just being the most of the time passive user of the services of different institutions and organizations. This created a space for them to address for the needs that they're doing, or to make a better future for those women and girls who are just to come here. So in the last several years, as I said, there were some changes in the laws in Serbia, as you can see on the screen. Law on asylum and temporary protection to 2018, law on foreigners 2024, law on employment on the foreigners 24 as well, and prevention of domestic violence 2016. I don't want to bother you with the details and everything. I just put like several remarks to see what were the biggest changes from one side, or something that we perceive and see as a challenges. So for example, from the first set of laws that were set around the changes on the law on asylum and temporary protection, was that gender-based violence was recognized officially as a base for claiming asylum, which from one side is like very, very positive and very good change. And like many of our beneficiaries had some benefits from this area and could be granted with the asylum and subsidiary protection based on the experience of gender-based violence, no matter the country of origin or on the way or here in Serbia. But we also had a lot of discussions with the representatives from asylum office, for example, where we were very interested in that, how the notions and informations of knowing that someone is had experience of gender-based violence impacting the further procedures, for example, or what they're doing when during the interviews they get the informations about the violence that had happened. Yeah, if they have like any mandates, because it's also under the jurisdiction of police, which they are, and we couldn't see any concrete links or like any other proceedings or refers to the beneficiaries directly to the support services. It happens occasionally, but it's not systematic, so we don't see the concrete links within the systems and different jurisdictions also in this process. When it comes to this law, we also found two concrete articles that are directly linked with or had mention of human trafficking for the cases of minors and best interest assessment. There are some a few words about the special procedures that will be guaranteed not to make additional harms or to guarantee the best interest for the person. Also within here, the previous practice was that we have that the person who claims for asylum, after the first interview for asylum, they could get the right to work. It was 9 months, but under these changes, it was changed to 6 months, and prevention of domestic violence legislation was basically something that came directly from the Istanbul Convention that was also ratified by Serbia, and it's guaranteeing the prevention of GBV. But when we were also discussing with the groups, task groups who were basically in charge for coordination on the cases of gender-based violence and domestic violence, we never get any concrete information about the topics that were discussed and concrete cases about about gender-based violence in refugee and migrant populations. So most of the time, those the full package of activities that are considered through this law are not applied to these categories. When it comes to the human trafficking, we also had the process of changes of criminal code that is currently defining human trafficking under the article of 388 is being revised, but with the idea to increase the penalties, but the inclusion is dedicated to the highest penalties, but not changing the minimal penalties, which we also find a bit problematic, because most of the time we are not getting to the point of the higher penalties when talking about the processing human trafficking in criminal narratives. Now we are also since the Serbia is in pre-accession phase to EU, we are also adopting a series of different laws right now, and one of them is the law about human trafficking, which is in the final drafting phase and comments, getting ready for a public debate. This process was lasting for several months and was really turbulent for us. Athena was a part of the working group, and basically the victims' rights keeper in those process, since we could see that like many ideas that were mentioned along the process were very problematic and could potentially jeopardize and go a little bit away from the protection and for the victim-oriented approach. But yeah, at this phase we will see how it goes. We managed to directly influence some of the changes in those process, but some of those that I will highlight right now is one that for the first time financial support for the license programs for specialized NGOs was mentioned. So Athena is one of the service provider. Our assisted housing is licensed program, but so far had never been supported by the government, even though all the actors are using the assisted houses program that Athena is running for referring the beneficiaries. And for the first time, we also heard about compensation funds for victims of human trafficking who will be identified in the future. And the last discussions and last comments that were just drafted, it was still a little worry how this law is going to be imbalanced with the laws that we previously mentioned, especially when it comes to the refugees and migrants victims of human trafficking, and how to make sure that some procedures are not doubled, or that the humanitarian stay or reflection and recovery period is guaranteed, no matter if the one process, for example, for asylum is ongoing or like being stopped, and then on the other side we do have a processing of the criminal case of human trafficking, how it works. So we're not still quite sure how is it going to be solved. And for one of the last slides about the situation in here currently in Balkans, 2000, as you all know, Balkan route is still very active and still alive, with some numbers which are decreasing comparing to the previous years. So Commissariat for Refugee and Migrants reported during 2024 they had a little bit less than 20,000 registered refugees and migrants within the governmental facilities, from which 25% were women and children. But also, according to the international organization and Frontex, the number of entries to the Serbia it's doubled basically, or around 45,000 of people. Still dominantly, we do have people from Syria and Afghanistan and Turkey who are coming to Serbia and staying here for a certain period of time. There are several reasons for decrease in the number of refugees and migrants in Serbia in this period. It's definitely the agreement between the Greece and Turkey on better border control, as well as the fact that Serbia also introduced a visa regime with the several countries, which also influenced the whole route that was used. But also, regardless of decrease in the number of the refugees and migrants, we are still they are still actually facing numerous problems in Serbia, which are like previous as in the previous years. Certain findings are also showing that states are approaching refugees and migrants in also more brutal way when it comes to the border control. And for example, with Hungary, we had like many situations reported of the pushbacks, but also on the other side, many of the asylum centers and transit centers in this area have been closed. So basically, it's questionable how they can access the proper facilities and accommodation. And we can also see the switch from the government that basically they want to maintain this humanitarian approach again when it comes to the basic care for the refugees and migrants. So those facilities are turned down, and they don't want to deal with it in the other way. However, also this approach has a particular negative impact of refugees and migrants, especially women and children, the victims of human trafficking. Still no specialized programs within the systematic response were offered. Also, when we talk about LGBTIQ community, I think that for now, like Athena was the only organization who was in Serbia, but also in the region, available to offer the programs for this concrete category. When it comes to the official numbers, it's 2015, only 54 victims of human trafficking from refugee and migrant population were identified in Serbia, which we are still like considering as some, I don't know, statistical mistake, considering the experiences from the field that we were facing and getting to know when we were talking with the people from 2015 until now. And this is also one of the things that it's somehow proving the systematic response to migration that we only had out of this. We had only one court proceeding for the human trafficking in the case of coercion of committing criminal offense for one woman from Ukraine, and it was last year. Also, even that there were many recommendations coming towards Serbia. For example, one from European Commission that was part of the progress report was definitely establishing proactive identification and initial screening and risks of the assessments during the entry over the entry point, but that had never happened. And also they were like different efforts towards the addressing of the need for specialized services for unaccompanied and separated children, especially those with experience of gender-based violence or human trafficking. And also identification process is, as I said, it's not done proactively, and also most of the reports toward the body that is doing the official identification is coming from the civil society organization, which are operating on the field. And you can see for the last year, out of 16 identified victims, like more than 60% or 70% was referred only by Athena. And also about the border control things, that we could see many changes in the management of the whole migration, and we could see that all the efforts, no matter if they were done by the government on their own or were coming with different agreements between the countries, were definitely some who were putting additional risks to the most vulnerable. And I want to leave some time for the questions and discussion, but I want to also enter the presentation with one quote of the member of our advocacy group. She said that nobody is going to count on me. I'm going to be a migrant, refugee, or asylum seeker. I'm not even a second-class citizen. I have no class. I have nothing. But being there now and being able to openly talk about issue, and having, in this case, Athena on our side, make us brave enough to share it with decision makers as well. And that definitely helps. I'm going to finish with this quotation. There's some contacts of Athena, so you can get in touch also with us for additional questions, or you can also take a look to the publications that we have. That was also what was Erica saying about correlation with digital surrounding and human trafficking. We had one amazing research that we published during the COVID, when we interviewed 178 victims of human trafficking who were using our programs the last 10 years, wanted to know how the digital surrounding and digital communication was basically used for the whole exploitation and in human trafficking process. So if you're curious about it, you can also find it on our website. Many of the publications are also available in English. Thank you.
Thank you, Zorana, for such a complete explanation. For the sake of time, we will go directly to the next panel, and we will have the discussion later. So I will pass the word again to Erika Oliva, who will explain the situation along the Mediterranean route, which is, as you may know, another important migration route. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you very much, Erika, and also thank you to Zorana for the amazing presentation and for highlighting the work of NGOs, because I think that they are the crucial actors in the fight against THB, not only for the support services, but also for prevention and prevention and also like awareness raising. So concerning, you mentioned, of course, the Balkan route, but as Erika introduced, we also have urged to discuss about THB for what concern the Mediterranean route, also known as the route with mixed migration flows, which in Southern Europe countries such as, for example, Italy or Spain or Greece, have represented like problematic issue for what concern identification of potential victim of THB for many reasons. First of all, for the condition of arrivals, meaning that when people arrive from the sea, they are, of course, in huge number, and the identification and first screening and first aid processes don't allow personnel there to have time enough to even catch any glimpse of potential trafficking indicators, because the situation is very tense, and it's not just about training, because there are not only police officers, but also, like, for example, humanitarian officers working at the arrival points, but really there is like no time to even like interact properly with the persons there and try to spot sign of trafficking situation or potential trafficking situation. So this is like the first panoramic situation. Going deeper into it, there are, among the Mediterranean routes, there are, of course, different forms of trafficking evolving. So one of the most common at the very beginning, and we are talking, for example, even when the first, during the Mediterranean route, we had the arrival, for example, from the Balkan area. So a lot of Albanians coming from Albania, of course, reaching the coast of Italy. So these were the very first forms, huge numbers of trafficking happening in the country, and they were mainly trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. So of course, the targeted victims were mainly women and girls. And this is very important also for the trends, because when we talk about trafficking, the first thing that we have in mind is trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, because it was the most common and the most evident form of trafficking, and also because it involved mainly women. And I'm saying that because, of course, it's part of the topic that we are discussing today, but also because, like, in the general mindset, it's always easier to identify women as a vulnerable group and someone you can actually work with in order to make them realize that they were a victim. So this is something that, for example, when I used to work in NGO, is something that we encountered a lot. When you have females victims, it's always, let's say, easier to start the process of, like, reasoning and discuss together the situation of being a victims. But when it's about male, of course, like the gender, the structure, the gender dimension of the male that cannot identify themselves as potential victim is always like stronger and urgent. And that's also why, like, the numbers, especially in the past years, were always, it's one of the reasons why the numbers were always lower compared, for example, to the female percentage. So among mixed migration flows, of course, the biggest flows were also one coming from Africa, from the African route. So especially if we think about 2018 and those years over there, mainly coming from Nigeria. And here we have like the first one of the first form of trafficking, which is also the trafficking for sexual exploitation involving cultural, in a strong cultural perspective, because, for example, in the case of Nigerian women coming to Italy, we encountered a strong component of juju rites. For those of you who are not familiar with what the juju is, in brief, it's a traditional ritual happening in mainly Nigeria, where girls who are coerced into a trafficking situation are forced to swear in front of a magician, also called native doctor, like by repeating formulas such as, for example, if I do not obey to the person accompanying me, if I will not respect the pact, if I will not give back the money, I will be tortured, my family will be tortured, my family members will die, something bad will happen. All of these, like I'm trying to make it, to describe it very briefly, but all of these also happening like in a tribal context, involving also, for example, donation of part of your body, like for example, hair or blood or pubic hair. So this is very important because like it adds a personal dimension that makes person feel even more connected with the land, with the promise and the native doctor, even when the person will be in Europe. So, you know, it's something that happened before the journey. So before starting like the journey into the Mediterranean. So it happens there, but still this stays with the person forever. And I'm saying this because, for example, when I was working in NGO, it happened a lot. We encountered girls. And one of the hardest part was adding the cultural dimension into the anti-trafficking efforts. Because it is something that has to be taken into consideration because it's something deeply rooted into someone's culture and tradition. So you cannot just say to the person, no, it's not real. Because according to our standard, our like Italian standard or like European standard, it wasn't real. Because that's not how it works. And that's also why, like when we discuss about cross-cultural and gender-sensitive approach, we also have to keep in mind this kind of perspective. Other thing happening, for example, now in the Mediterranean routes is the increasing number of persons coming, for example, from countries like Bangladesh or Pakistan, involved in cases of exploitation for labor purposes. So we had an increased number of this type, especially for what concern agriculture, or like working in the farms, sometimes even like in the construction field, but this is like less common. And also this kind of trafficking involves, of course, arriving through the Mediterranean route, but also a lot from the Balkan routes. Also, thanks to the use of like visas, like officially released visas, that then are used, of course, to keep the person illegally in the countries once the visas are expired. And of course, like you have to keep in mind that there are also like communities. So in different area, if I use the example of Italy, for example, you will see like the migration groups moving where there are already existing communities. So for example, here nearby Rome, we have Latina, and there we have a huge community of Indian people that are exploited for labor exploitation in the agricultural field. We are all aware of this type of thing happening, and the anti-trafficking effort in the countries are also involving like the use of cultural mediators, which is something that I personally believe has always been a key point in the anti-trafficking effort here in Italy. And I'm referring about cultural mediators and not interpreters. There is a slight difference, but it's fundamental because the interpreters are just interpreting what the other person is saying, while if you use the advice of a cultural mediator, you actually use a bottom-up approach because that person really helps you to connect with the culture and with the identity of the person you are trying to interact with. So it's not just mere translation of a dialogue, but is really connecting with the person and like saying to the person, okay, I'm here to listen to you, I'm seeing you, and I'm trying to understand you. So please, let's dialogue together and let's make your situation better to get together. So this is also why, for example, at the arrival point, when possible, at the arrival point of the Mediterranean route, organizations are also asking for the permanent support of cultural mediators there. Because, I mean, it might be really a tiny drop in the ocean, but it's still something. Because from there, from like small word or chit chat, you are still able to identify promptly some indicators that can help you support this person before they actually enter into the trafficking networks. Because when we talk about the Mediterranean routes, we talk about people arriving at European land, but they are not immediately trafficked. So, you know, they still have to have time to get in contact with their traffickers and like reach their final destination point, which is never the hotspot, of course. So let's imagine, for example, again, using the case of Italy, the trafficked person is arriving in Sicily, but their destination point is Veneto region, so northern Italy at the border with the Balkan route. So, you know, it's never easy to promptly identify, but still there are tiny margins to act promptly. And that's why the collaboration between national stakeholders, but also NGO working in the field and providing support is fundamental in this kind of context. But it's also fundamental trainings that keep in mind what Zorana was saying before, also like the gender perspective, but also the cultural perspective, and also like the recognition of the role of NGOs as like proper stakeholders in the common fight against THP. Not related to the Balkan route, but since we are to the Mediterranean route, but since you are mentioning like different form of THP, we mentioned, as I say, the two common ones are trafficking for labor exploitation and trafficking for sexual exploitation. But we are also now having a huge amount of minors and unaccompanied children coming through the Mediterranean routes that are then, of course, used for labor exploitation, but also for petty crimes and small criminal activities that can also include, for example, begging in the streets. And also another form of trafficking that is not properly related to the Mediterranean route, but is still present, is the lover boy method, which is more common, I would say, to the Eastern Europe area, but still it's something that is present and that has been boosted up by the use of technologies. For those of you who are not familiar with the lover boy methods, basically, sorry, I just saw a question. I don't know if I have to address it, Erika, just give instruction. I follow your instruction, but just in case, tell me if I have to address it right now or later on. But going back just briefly to the lover boy method, so basically is a method mainly used in Eastern Europe countries where boys are making girls believe that they love them. So they are the boyfriend, like, you know, it's a girlfriend-boyfriend relation at the beginning, but then at one point the girl is sold to someone else or is put by the boyfriend himself into the trafficking situation. So it starts as a normal relation and then it evolves in something totally different. I just like use the question just dropped in the chat to just finalize and give the floor back to the audience. When there is no time to detect potential trafficking cases at the arrival, is because of the lack of staff or it's because of the staff lacks opportunity to take people aside? It's both. Basically, it's both. Because like so this year, if we look at statistics this year, of course, the number of arrivals, especially for what concern the Mediterranean area, are lower than last year, for example. But still, it's a huge amount of people. And sometimes there is not enough staff there prepared to welcome all the necessity of these people arriving. So you have to imagine like a huge amount of people arriving there. And the first thing first is that you have to assess first need of this person. So first are medical needs. So if there are someone vulnerable, pregnant women, someone in danger, someone who needs immediate medical attention. So these are the first needs to address. And then they are put in the hotspot places where identification procedure can start. But when I say identification procedure, meaning that they're just taking digital prints and say, who are you, where are you from? And that's it. Because it's necessary for the Euro to enter the person into the Eurodac database that connects all the European member states. And then the person can later on decide whether he wants to appeal for ask for asylum or not. So this is one thing. So you see a lot of persons that has to process this and like few staff. And the second is that sometimes staff, especially for what concern police, are not prepared to identify trafficking cases. And it's not just because they lack training, but because there is continuous rotation among police staff. So not all countries in Europe have specialized THP units. And of course, the specialized THP units are not the ones that are staying at the hotspot. So that's it. Thank you very much. Give the floor back to Erika.
Thank you very much, Erika. You've been very clear and also very comprehensive and tackling many issues. So now we will turn to the last part of this webinar before opening a discussion part with all of you in case you have questions. We wanted to end on a positive note. So now Jennifer Kamau from the German NGO International Women's Space will delve into the role of migrant women in activism and self-advocacy. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, White Plus, for organizing this webinar. And thank you to the panelists who have presented before. I will just also give some context, also in the context of trafficking, because we're also affected by the topic, and the importance of self-organization as an organization, you know, combating some of these things that happen to the people that are affected. Because there is always the narrative that someone either has to be a victim or a hero. But it is possible for people to engage in topics that are affecting them. And we always encourage the people who are affected to be self-organized, because it gives a completely different approach. And just to add on to what the other two panelists have said, Erika and Zorana, the issue of modern day slavery is always being mentioned as modern day slavery. And we go back to the issue of colonialism, where colonialism was the biggest form of exploitation that we have seen. And the colonizers came to the country through the same routes that people are coming, through the sea, and came to our countries. The conquest happened and people were brought in, they were trafficked through slavery all over Europe and America to provide free labor. The context is free labor. And this free labor has built European and American countries for a very long time. And the fight for the liberation from this exploitation is still ongoing. But then there are very new mechanisms that are devised to still maintain the context of slavery. So now we have the modern day slavery. And the issue of human capital and who is providing this human capital is also what constitutes what we talk about ratio capital. So racism becomes an aspect on why certain people are subjugated to provide free or cheap labor or be continuously exploited. So these are some of the things that are very important to understand, the connection between capitalism and racism. Because then, if we do not talk about this big, the bigger context of capitalism, and because capitalism is a system that needs maintenance and sustenance. So then, when we talk about combating capitalism, the issue of racism becomes it becomes the topic, because then racism has to be maintained. It is important to have some other people being subjugated to provide this cheapness of labor and everything that we all know about. I don't want to dwell in the topics because most of you are working in these fields. So what happens in these processes? When people migrate, and it depends on who is migrating, because there is always the migration of Europeans to our countries where they become experts and investors and tourists. But when we come the other way, then we are refugees or we are migrants. And these characters are also more defined, because then dehumanization becomes the main point. So people are so dehumanized that they have established issues of people being undocumented or illegal or a refugee. And in this context, there's a lot of precariousness. And people are so dehumanized in a way that even when they start being trafficked, they think it's a good way of life. So these are some of the things that I think as a feminist organizations, we need to not separate the issue of racism, capitalism, and the intersections of all these migration topics and all these topics. And when you see the borders, because now the borders have become monetized and militarized, then it becomes a very different topic, but a whole topic of its own on violences on these borders. So the topic becomes now, it becomes more complex, because someone can be facing very many forms of violences, but then the protection comes in these sexual favors or being enslaved. It's very intertwined, and it's a very complex topic that it needs a lot of time to dwell into the topic. When we come to the issue of Germany, for example, because this is where we are based, there is always the issue, and with this I want to point out on, for example, the issue of prostitution, for example, and how issues of Germany's approach to trafficking, it's a bit controversial, because, for example, Germany legalized prostitution in 2002. So even when people are trafficked and put into prostitution, there is this aspect of the legal aspect that is not able, that covers all of the things that go within the context of trafficking of people who the vulnerability of trafficking in these processes, because then it becomes the legal aspect is applied. And then, of course, the victim support and legal framework is very slim. There's really, especially when something is legalized, and when I talk about legalized, it's a dehumanization, but then it's painted in a way that it looks like it's a good thing. And a good example is the Dublin regulation, where in this space of Dublin regulation, people are undocumented, are on deportation, are facing state violences. But then it is a Dublin regulation. So people can can wash away the topic and say, no, but they are being deported because they're a Dublin case. But then in the process of this Dublin, so much is happening. So when prostitution is legalized, within that framework of legal, so many things are happening, and it needs people who, it needs a lot of work to bring out the effects of the act, the trafficking and the legal aspect. And if there is a legal aspect, how is the support system? And this has been also involved in these issues of trafficking for cheap labor, and in fields like in care work, in domestic work, sex work, agriculture, meat processing, in very many ways that people are trafficked. But then the issue of trafficking is very vague, or there are some parameters that are used around this that people even who had been trafficked are not aware of being trafficked. And then when we talk about issues on ratio capital, because this is also a very interesting topic to talk about ratio capital. And why? Because we are also questioning, why can't they just say, instead of the EU pact, the migration pact, which is now very new and very broad, and Europe-wide, they have organized themselves. They become, it's an organized crime against, they have formed something like an organized gang against migration. And in that we have Frontex, we have all these Eurodac issues. And our question is always, why do they just say the Geneva Convention of 1952 has been scrapped and people cannot apply for asylum? But then it comes to the issue of ratio capital. They need people to come because they need this ratio capital. And a good example is people are kept in a limbo within the asylum system. And in this limbo, when they know they need a specific number of labor force, they create a form of legalization, like what Germany had with the Chancenaufenthalt. So they decide people who came from between this year and this year, you're going to get permission to work. And that's the form of ratio capital that they keep, that we want to have these people here, we will not legalize them. And then the conditions of being legalized are very, someone thinks now I'm becoming legalized, but the conditions around this legalization is also a very big way of exploitation. So the topic becomes another different thing that is very complex. And when we talk about the EU Pact, for example, there has been discussions on how to deal with traffickers. The old definition of trafficking, they have not redefined what trafficking means. And this includes criminalizations of individuals and organizations providing assistance of migrants, including help, rescue operations, and support. So because of this issue of trafficking, they have not redefined what forms of punishments they want to give to traffickers, the people involved in trafficking. So even organizations who are offering help or individuals, then it becomes, they create the chaos within all these issues of talking about protection. But in the real sense, they are trying to punish people who are also trying to offer support and aid. So it becomes very intertwined in this whole process of protecting people from being trafficked. And another interesting scenario from Germany, for example, because of the issue of, they say because of traffickers, they have introduced something they are calling the Bezahlkarte, the card. And in this card, they say they deny asylum seekers money. So they are given a credit card and only 50 euros against the credit card so that they can protect people from trafficking. Now, what are you protecting when people are already here? You deny them their basic human needs in the name of managing trafficking. And everybody thinks it's okay because then they're going to control monies that asylum seekers are making, and so the traffickers will not get money. But the trafficking cartel is a very big cartel, and it has nothing to the people who are seeking for protection here. So some of the work that we do is really being very intentional on bringing out these forms of abuses that states carry out to people who are seeking protection. So we question why even the victims of gender-based violence cannot get protection through the Istanbul Convention, because it should protect people. And then the bigger question becomes, whose laws are they for? So it becomes a very complicated topic. And unless people have questions, then I can keep talking for a very long time.
Actually, I see a question for
Yeah.
you.
And I don't know who the person is.
By the way, thank you, Jennifer, for describing also a little bit the context of human trafficking in Germany. And now I think we can open the discussion for the audience. If you have questions for our panelists, or if you want to give your contribution, just open the mic or write in the chat, raise your hand as you prefer. So Gioia Bonsanti is asking, thank you so much for the presentations. I have a question. Could you share some examples of successful intervention or strategies at the local level that have empowered women or have improved the system? Very general question. I don't know, like.
Maybe I can talk about the empowerment part, and that's why I'm emphasizing, because I also came in Germany in 2012 as an asylum seeker. And from there, that's where one of the founders of International Women's Space, I was one of the founders to address issues that affect asylum seekers. And in the process, we have been organizing a series of many things in terms of peer-to-peer empowerment, legal workshops, and also focusing on the issue of racism, because we are affected by the issue of race and racism. Otherwise, in most of these endeavors, you find, yeah, everybody's talking about a certain group of people, but the group of people is not representing itself. And this creates this power dynamic. So it's either a victim or a hero, these two. And in between, everybody else is lost. And the importance of empowerment is that people begin to understand the political dynamic in which their life is being impacted by, and connecting with other struggles that are globally. And I have seen how it impacts, and people begin to understand how histories and how narratives have been created to exclude certain peoples from particular discourses. So I have seen the importance of being part of these conversations.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We still have more or less 10 minutes. So if the other panelists want to add something to this question, or if the audience has other questions, they're here for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, given the very, say, move to the conservative or ultra-right in Europe and also in different countries that you are residing, do you see like any opportunities to you talked about different laws, to push the laws a bit further or to promote implementation better, or do you see it is more a matter of trying to resist further pushback in terms of protecting the rights of those being trafficked?
Let me just break the silence. I think with the work that we are doing, it has become extremely challenging. And it is also challenging because it's very systematic. Because EU itself has, EU and the states, United States, they have formed this fight against migration. And it has become, it's like, and a good example is something like the Frontex that we all know. if this Frontex was in our own countries, they would have been called terrorists to fight against migrants. And yet, on the other hand, they still say they are still working within the legal parameters that demand protection for the certain particular people. So what has happened is that funding has been taken off for community-led organizations, CBOs. And the challenge is whether to step back and say we cannot continue to fight or still hang on there, because now we are trying to maintain organizations that have been working on this topic. Otherwise, if we all pull out, then again, after some years, people have to start again. So it's about maintenance, but actually the challenge on migration has become very big because there's also the threat of the replacement of European people, white European people in the continent. So it becomes really very, very personal. And you can even tell anger from people you usually thought you were in solidarity with because of this narrative being pushed of people, white European people being replaced, the replacement.
I think Erika wanted to intervene.
I think just briefly that what Jennifer just said is pretty accurate because I mean it's evident and it's in front of us. At the same time, when we are talking about especially people that have been trafficked or potential victim of trafficking, of course, there is always this kind of narrative that says, you know, but they are victim of trafficking. Indeed, one of the things that they always say the most within the European Forum is that if you discuss about migration, just pure migration, you will always find disagreement. But if you drop the trafficking bomb into the discussion, then of course everyone will agree because, hey, you know, they're victim of trafficking. So it's sort of like, you know, they are sort of specialized category because they are victim of trafficking. So you have to kind of show that you are empathetic toward this category, but it's just like you're seeing the person as victim of trafficking. But the same person is also like migrant, but can also be like a woman, a mother. You know, there's more than it. It's not just about etiquette. So this is something that has to be kept in mind. I think also when we discuss about this form of repulsion and like pushback, because of course, like if you say like it's like I can also use the example of Italy because, you know, I think you all are aware of the fact that they are deporting people in the center based in Albania. But of course, if those person are saying, hey, like providing like indicators that they have been trafficked or that they are minors, everyone is forced to respect the vulnerability and to take the people back in order to grant them the possibility to like follow the normal process of asylum. So, you know, at the same time, it's like, I think it's a very weird and controversial situation because vulnerability now is used as a counterbalanced thing in order to protect themselves, which is something that shouldn't happen in a context of respect of human rights, as Jennifer was saying.
I think I have to respond to Aisha, I'm seeing a question there, because there's the issue of sex work is work for those who decide they want to be in the industry of to have sex work as work, and it needs to be respected as it is. But in this framework of legality, and the legalization was very good because then people can demand protection, and I can imagine the protection and what they have, the steps that have been made in order to protect people who have decided to do the sex work. But also in this context, it can also be used in this human trafficking context. It becomes a little bit difficult to know or to detect or combat trafficking. I think this is the biggest challenge. And that is why working with local NGOs, people who are doing the work, and from this context of empowerment and working with, from an intersection of feminist perspective, then we are able to formulate and come up with ideas of how to make this identification. Because when we leave it to the state, they go the other opposite direction. They use this concept of vulnerability to change laws for everybody, to make it worse for everybody else. So to dehumanize, to tighten, to dehumanize. So this is a very big scope, and I think this working together from the grassroots organizations and people impacted has a very big difference.
If I might, I do agree with what Jennifer has just said, because I did outreach work myself. So I discussed a lot also with women, with sex workers, actually, because again, here in Italy, for example, as in Germany, prostitution is legal. But even though prostitution is legal, still they find way to criminalize the person and make it become illegal. So for example, so you can legally do sex work, but at the same time, if you are doing sex work in the streets, in like nearby the city, they can sanction you for violating public order. So, still, they are still criminalizing the person, even though the person is allowed to do that. And as Jennifer was saying, I think that one of the greatest things that we can do from an intersectional and gender perspective is listen to this person, because like the action starts from there. So a lot of like the greatest thing I've learned when I was working in the streets is by listening to this person, by listening to them and asking actually like to hear their voice properly and then act accordingly to what they were saying. Because again, sex work is such if the person decide to do that as such. If not, it can be trafficked or forced prostitution. And in the case of trafficking, of course, it's different. Like the border is really tiny, but that's where the organization starts. Because if you actually talk to those people, if you discuss with them, if you show that you are able to like listen without judging, because a lot happen with the sex work, it's the taboo. Because of course, when you discuss about sex work, there's a lot of taboo around it. So if you have a non-judgmental approach, I think that also from there you can more easily detect potential cases of THP, because then the women can start to trust you and like actually eventually discuss and disclose like cases in where they might need help, So yeah.
I don't know if there is time to respond to Sylvia.
I think we can answer this question and then close the webinar.
I will try to answer it because it's a very broad question. When I say asylum seekers are kept in limbo, and this limbo is such a gray area that it takes quite some time before the asylum procedures are responded to. Or there is the issue of you're a Dublin case, you have to be deported to your first country of entry, or you are deported and then you come back and then you have to live undocumented for 18 months before the Dublin regulation ends. And then there's now this limbo on who is the priority in terms of now the asylum seekers, because there's always the good and the bad. For example, even during the Ukraine war, we saw the BIPOC Ukrainians being, not being a priority. There's always a division of the good and the bad asylum seekers. So they prioritize on who they think should integrate quickly, and they prioritize on that. Every other person is left by yourself. So you have to navigate the system by yourself. You have to understand what is required. There is a language challenge that becomes very problematic. Before you can even get German classes, then you have to wait for such a period of time. And that's where our empowerment also comes in, because then we have been working on these topics of empowerment and understanding which local organizations are we able to work with from an intersectional perspective to empower people and refer people when they have very particular needs within the asylum process. Now we have also, with the issue of Dublin regulation, so many women have become undocumented. And for example, there's a need for shelter. This the state will not give you because there's assumption that, you're already illegal. So with these terminologies of illegality, undocumented, and refugees, and good, and people who have prospects or don't have prospects, becomes very complicated for people on the move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So it's 3:30, so I think that we can close the webinar. I want to thank everyone for participating, and I want to especially thank the speakers, the panelists for bringing this webinar to life, and also Milan for having helped me organizing this. I hope you found this webinar interesting and that it sparked some valuable reflections on the topic. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon.